In the mid-1970s, Piper Aircraft did something no airplane manufacturer had ever attempted. They sent surveys to 10,000 flight instructors across America, asking one deceptively simple question: what would your perfect training aircraft look like? The responses poured in. Instructors wanted an airplane that was affordable, comfortable, and, crucially, one that would actually spin. The dominant Cessna 150 was too forgiving, they argued. It practically flew itself out of trouble. Students weren't learning real skills. So Piper built exactly what they asked for. The PA-38 Tomahawk arrived in 1978 as a sleek, modern, budget-friendly trainer that looked like nothing else on the flight line. Flight schools couldn't buy them fast enough. At just over $15,000, it was the cheapest new trainer on the market, and Piper was rolling them off the production line at 8 per day. But within months of those first deliveries, something terrifying began to emerge. Student pilots and their instructors were dying in this airplane at a rate that defied explanation. The Tomahawk earned a new name, one whispered across flight lines and scrawled in logbooks with dark humor. They called it the Trauma Hawk, and the reason it was killing people would take decades to fully uncover. To understand why the Tomahawk seduced an entire industry, you need to understand the world it was born into. The 1970s were the golden age of general aviation. Flight schools were everywhere, and the biggest manufacturers weren't just selling airplanes. They were building empires. Cessna had its pilot centers. Piper had its flight centers. Beechcraft had its aero centers. The strategy was brilliant and ruthless. Get a student pilot hooked on your brand in a cheap 2-seat trainer, then watch them climb the ladder. Your retractable, your twin, your turboprop. Brand loyalty started in the cockpit of that very first airplane, and one company owned that cockpit completely. Cessna's 150 and 152 series had achieved something approaching total market domination. Over 31,000 built across 2 decades. More pilots learned to fly in a Cessna 150 than in any other aircraft in history. The airplane was cheap, forgiving, and virtually indestructible. It would practically fly itself out of a stall. For flight schools, it was the perfect machine. For Piper, it was an unassailable fortress. But Piper had a plan. In 1972, they launched what seemed like a stroke of genius. Instead of guessing what instructors wanted, they would simply ask them. Piper sent surveys to 10,000 certified flight instructors across the United States, requesting their vision of the ideal training aircraft. The responses revealed something fascinating. Instructors wanted better visibility, lower operating costs, a roomier cockpit. But here's the response that changed everything. 40% of those instructors specifically requested an airplane with more aggressive spin characteristics. The Cessna was too docile, they argued, too forgiving. Students were graduating without ever truly learning how to recover from a spin because the airplane did it for them. So Piper gave them exactly what they wanted. The PA-38 Tomahawk featured a cutting-edge NASA-developed airfoil, a distinctive T-tail that was the hottest design trend in aviation, a spacious bubble canopy with near-panoramic visibility, and a price tag that made flight school owners weep with joy. Just over $15,000, thousands less than a comparable Cessna. Production launched at Piper's Lock Haven, Pennsylvania factory in early 1978, starting at 2 aircraft per day and rapidly accelerating to 8. Flight schools across America rushed to place orders. Nearly 2,500 would roll off the line in just 5 years. The Tomahawk looked like the future of flight training. Nobody suspected it might also become its darkest chapter. Here's where the story takes a sinister turn. The Tomahawk that Piper tested and the Tomahawk that Piper shipped were not the same airplane, and that difference would prove fatal. Before a single production aircraft left the factory, Piper's manufacturing team made modifications to the wing. The prototype that the FAA spin-tested and certified had 11 full wing ribs and a solid, rigid main spar. The production aircraft had just 4. Lightening holes were drilled directly into the spar to reduce weight and cut costs. These changes were made after the FAA had completed its certification tests. The modified wing was never retested, not once. Think about what this means. The FAA certified an airplane with a stiff, precisely shaped wing. Piper then built a fundamentally different wing, put it on every single Tomahawk that left the factory, and never told anyone. One of the original design engineers later explained to the NTSB exactly why this mattered. The NASA airfoil Piper had chosen was extremely sensitive to its shape. If that shape became distorted, performance would rapidly deteriorate. He called the softened production wing a new and unknown commodity in stalls and spins. A Pandora's box. The consequences arrived almost immediately. Within months of the first deliveries, complaints began flooding in from flight schools across the country. The airplane exhibited abrupt, unpredictable behavior at the stall. Violent, uncommanded rolls. Flat spins that defied every standard recovery technique. Instructors and students started dying at an alarming rate. The numbers were devastating. The Tomahawk's fatal stall and spin accident rate measured between 0.336 and 0.751 per 100,000 flight hours. The Cessna 150 and 152, it was designed to replace measured just 0.098 to 0.134, 3 to 5 times more deadly in the one scenario. A training aircraft encounters most frequently. But here's what made it truly terrifying. During one check ride, an FAA examiner entered a standard spin using the exact procedures published in the pilot's operating handbook. The airplane would not respond. Controls at full deflection. Nothing. In absolute desperation, both pilots unstrapped and threw their body weight forward against the instrument panel. The nose finally dropped. They recovered less than 1,000 feet above the ground. Post-landing inspection revealed 0 mechanical defects. The airplane was functioning exactly as built. Pilots gave the Tomahawk a new name, the Trauma Hawk. 36 airworthiness directives would eventually be issued. But the real scandal was still buried in Piper's production records, waiting to be uncovered. On March 5, 1994, over the flat farmland of central Kansas, a certified flight instructor and a private pilot climbed into a Piper Tomahawk for a routine biennial flight review. The aircraft was properly maintained. The weather was clear. Neither pilot walked away. Both sustained fatal injuries in the crash near Inman, Kansas. It was far from the first Tomahawk fatality, but this one would finally blow the entire scandal wide open. The NTSB launched a comprehensive investigation, and what they uncovered was damning. Certification flight testing had been conducted on a single pre-production prototype. The testing report contained no record of turning flight stalls with extended flaps or accelerated stalls ever having been evaluated. And most critically, multiple Piper test pilots came forward with testimony that contradicted everything the company had publicly maintained. Production Tomahawks, they stated, were nothing like the article certified as far as stall characteristics are concerned. But the most chilling testimony came from Piper's own people. Dr. Richard Kruger, one of the original design engineers, told investigators that the entire design team had been nervous about the softness of the production wing even after certification was granted. They knew the GAW-1 airfoil demanded rigid precision. They knew the production wing couldn't deliver it. A second test pilot revealed something even more disturbing. Not only were production Tomahawks unpredictable in a stall, but each individual airplane did not perform stalls the same from one flight to another. Every aircraft was essentially a different machine at the edge of its envelope. No instructor could reliably prepare a student for what any given Tomahawk might do next. The FAA responded in 1998 by reviewing production drawings and concluding that the wing designs matched. Controversy officially resolved. Except nobody in the aviation community truly believed it. Now, here's the twist that nobody expected. Despite everything, despite the fatal spins, the terrifying testimonies, and the 36 airworthiness directives, the Tomahawk's overall accident rate was actually 1/3 lower than the Cessna 150 and 152. Lower. The airplane that killed 3 to 5 times more people in spins was statistically safer in every other measurable category. Some argue it produced better pilots precisely because it demanded absolute precision. It punished complacency with consequences no other trainer imposed. Roughly 649 Tomahawks remain on the FAA registry today. Some still train cadets in the Australian Air Force. The Traumahawk refuses to die. Whether that represents resilience or recklessness depends entirely on which statistic you choose to believe. The Piper Tomahawk stands as one of aviation's most unsettling paradoxes, an aircraft designed by the very people it would ultimately betray. 10,000 instructors asked for a trainer that would challenge their students, and Piper delivered something that challenged everyone, including the laws of predictable aerodynamics. The real lesson isn't that crowdsourcing design is inherently flawed. It's that somewhere between the prototype and the production line, someone decided that cutting costs mattered more than cutting corners safely. 11 wing ribs became 4, a rigid spar gained lightning holes, and an aircraft that passed every certification test became something its own engineers described as a new and unknown commodity, 3 to 5 times the fatal spin rate of its nearest competitor, 36 airworthiness directives, decades of investigations, denials, and unresolved questions. Yet here's what haunts aviation historians most. Despite all of this, the Tomahawk produced a lower overall accident rate than the Cessna it was built to replace. It made better pilots, some argue, precisely because it demanded more from them. The ones who survived, anyway. If stories like this fascinate you, subscribe, because the history of aviation is filled with machines that promised everything and delivered the unthinkable.